Okay, so just a couple reminders. These monthly meetups are really meant not to be a presentation or us necessarily giving uh, advice as far as that's concerned. It's just to spark discussion, to talk about different topics, and hopefully, we can all, get some questions answered or maybe get some great ideas. So today, Kai Haymore is joining me, and she's the department chair at Athens Technical College. And I'm sure that you're all familiar with Kai. And so I am so lucky to have her with me as we just talk a little bit about libraries. And so um, I have a lot of kind of discussion questions here in the beginning, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on some of those topics. We could probably spend a whole day on some of the stuff. And maybe, in the spring, you may see some more things about libraries as well in the spring virtual conference. But we just wanted to kind of get the conversation started. And so the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is just to think about, what does your library look like? So where you're at, and what college and university you're at, what does your law library look like? Do you have a library? Is it actual books? Is it databases? What do you use? And I'd like you to put some of that stuff into the chat so that we can kind of see some of the opportunities that are out there, what people are using, things that people are getting, involved and using, as far as whether electronic or hard copy, or maybe you're sharing with a law library from a different school. So just feel free to either put it in the chat, or certainly you can unmute. We could talk about it too. Either way is fine with me. We do have a few people on here, so sometimes it's hard for me to see who might be jumping on or whatever. So feel free to add something to the chat or open up your mute and
Chris, do
okay.
you want me to kind of moderate and tell you what they're saying in the chat? Would that
No,
help you?
no, I appreciate it, but no, that's okay.
Okay.
Just for these discussions. And again, I want us to have a discussion, but I kind of wanted just to get started with this. I hear, Westlaw, Lexis, some electric databases, and then a county law library, which is kind of cool. No physical library anymore. Um, and multiple physical libraries due to multiple campuses. That's pretty cool. Westlaw, Lexis, right? Seems to be a lot of Westlaw. And anybody using like a local law library. So it says here, encouraged to get free public law library cards. Is anybody using, a law library that's off campus that might be just associated with your town or your locality? College libraries, electronic resources, Nexus Uni, Pine Online. Awesome. So Alex has asked a question in there, and I'm just gonna um, address that. I have done some exercises with Pacer. You can get a kind of a student access, so they can get a little bit of experience in logging into Pacer. Maybe somebody else has a better membership than that, but I have used that for learning how to file through Pacer. Fastcase, Hein Online, all kinds of good stuff. And I think that what is most important for those of us that are ABA, we want to make sure that we're hitting the right marks. And Kai's going to talk about some of that later on. But let's just talk a little bit about, seems like most of what I saw was a lot of online resources. For those of you that are still using books, um, you know, what do you do with the physical books? Like, do you keep them updated? Do you use them just for teaching tools? How are you using the physical books? Anybody can just unmute and we can just chat about it.
We have both. I keep some current, and the current ones that we use are ones that are also used by the community because Del Mar College opens its library to the legal community or anybody that wants to use it, kind of like a public library. And then for educational purposes, we have the usual, all the Texas stuff, federal stuff, but I've been honing that down, and I think I plan on retiring in December. So I don't know if I'm going to just kind of eliminate that before I go or wait for the new director to look like they're doing great things with the advisory committee. You know, got to give them a bone, right? So, but we do both LexisNexis through the school pays for that through the library, and our program pays for Westlaw. But
Okay.
the only thing that I keep updated is stuff that the community likes to use.
Yep. And I see a lot of stuff in the chat too about um, keeping them for teaching purposes, not necessarily updating them. Um, Anybody else want to add something verbally? So it's just a chat. Stop keeping the reporters up to date. I know that at my college, what we do is we don't do updates anymore of our statutes or the reporters. And so they are truly teaching tools. And I think again, I'm kind of old school. I still teach with the physical books at some point. So it's kind of nice to have something. It'd be nice if they could at least update the statutes, I think, but it just becomes a cost problem. So anybody else want to comment on electronic databases versus print?
Chris, we exclusively use our electronic databases. I'm the one who has the multiple campuses and multiple libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And all of our print resources are just marked for teaching purposes, but we don't teach on campus anymore. We're 100% remote. So until we have a campus presence again, I kind of feel guilty taking up library space. The only thing they keep updated is the state code because other programs use the code book too.
Well,
But
and I've done some silly things, and I don't know anybody else. I'm sure everybody else has, but I went into the library and made a bunch of videos using those tools, and I do use them
yeah,
occasionally in my online classes just to kind of show them right how the books would be used. I do miss going into the actual library for class and things like that.
yeah,
We don't do that either anymore. So
yeah.
anybody else?
Hi, Chris.
Hi,
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Um, we don't use any, let me put my camera on. We don't use any books anymore. We've been told repeatedly that no one uses books. And as a matter of fact, I've been searching desperately for a textbook that no longer incorporates digest because no one in our area uses digest. And I just did a fall market survey last year.
And
And came back to statutes. They might only keep the statutes. That's about it.
And
Sorry.
that's what you're saying, that's a survey of your attorneys in the area, like the
Yes.
firms and stuff that they're not doing it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think the surveys are a good idea, making sure that the problem with my area is that it's like it's all over the place. I mean, I might have a whole, town that there's every firm is using statute books still. And then I have another whole town that's like not doing any paper anymore. So I feel like you still have to do something, right? Go ahead, Neil Lafar.
Oh, I was just going to say, spoke to my advisory board, and they all said that, we're all using electronic and it is costly. The library reached out and said, Nilüfer, it's taking so much space and it's so cost prohibitive. We're not being able to update so many of these statutes and what have you. And since you get them electronically via LexisNexis. Why do we have to keep them? So we took the question to the advisory board, and the advisory board said what Diane was saying, that, you know, we're all using electronic resources. And we keep some samples just in case. Like one professor says, she likes to take the students to show them samples of what really it would look like if they were doing in books. So it's up to the instructor on how much they're using hard copies. And again, for student learning purposes, primarily it's online, but if an instructor wants to just give students a sense of what the textbooks would look like, we have samples. We have kept samples for that purpose. And the Delaware County Bar Association is here. They have a lot of things on the print, but they're even beginning to say that they're going to sort of get away from keeping hard copies because it takes space and it's costly. Students can go to the Delaware County Bar Association, but there is not a librarian who is going to take the responsibility of teaching them. They can do an assignment, it's open, they can do all that, but they say, no way, no how. We're not here to teach your students what to do and how to do them. You bring them and you can teach them, but we're not going to do that. But the books are available there.
Shannon said something in the chat, which I thought was interesting, was she has her head librarian come to her class and talk. I think that's the second part of the problem, right? Is that you can have them use the library, but is the librarian going to be able to help your students? Are they going to be able to show them the things that you could show them? You know, how does that all work? And so I think that's a great idea, Shannon, if you've got somebody who is willing to do that.
I really lucked out because she was very willing to come in and excited to come in and talk to the students. And I'm a new chair for a paralegal department. So I'm still figuring all of this out. But she came in and did a whole PowerPoint presentation, and she helped with the process of getting the students the free library card. And the resources that the library have are both physical, and then there are some electronic resources. So she was really big on the idea that understanding how things are organized for print research is helpful to the students in understanding how to do electronic research. So I was just lucky. She was great.
Yeah, and I actually love that concept because I do think it's immensely helpful to show the books first and then go to the electronics, you know, databases, because at least they can have that concept of breadcrumb trails and get some of that stuff first and then know what they're looking at, because I find a lot of our students are just overwhelmed in going into Westlaw and having this huge thing. Although they're very used to Google, it's not that, it's just an overwhelming amount of information, and they're always concerned about, well, which is the right source and what should I be, you know, and so sometimes that stuff helps. Just checking out the chat a little bit. It says,
Question, Chris, following Shannon. So this is your librarian at school or from the Bar Association?
This is the county law library. So
okay,
I'm in Massachusetts, and so we're in Essex County. And so she's the head law librarian, and I made an appointment to meet with her in advance to introduce myself and see if she could be on our board, our advisory board for the ABA. And then I also talked to her about assisting with trying to make these decisions about what do we keep in the library, what's everybody else doing, because I'm hearing law schools are not even keeping books on the shelf. And if law schools aren't doing it, why would community colleges be doing it? So she was great. And a lot of the students have already visited the law library in person.
Yeah, and there's a side conversation going on in the chat, which is about that. Like, do law schools use the books anymore? And a lot of people are saying that they're finding that the law schools in their area are also not using books. So then why are we necessarily doing that? And I mean, we could probably have a conversation about that too, and maybe we will at the end. I didn't want to take too much time. I do want to kind of get into the ABA guidelines, but a couple of other things that I saw in the chat. Sarah Bowman had put in the chat about a free legal research site called Describe. I haven't utilized that yet, Sarah, but it sounds like you found that helpful.
So I haven't dug into it yet. It was literally 2 days ago. Wickard AI did a legal presentation. They had 15 different AI presenters, all legal based related. And these folks are kind of out of nowhere, and they're trying to be competitors with Lexis and Westlaw, and they're still currently a free search. So I was just curious if anyone else had stumbled across them yet. I'm literally just learned of them 2 days ago. That was all.
I think and I'll let anybody say anything about that if they have. I think one of the things that obviously when you see up here pros and cons about things, right? The pros and cons, Westlaw is getting really expensive. We use Westlaw. Some of these Lexis programs are getting really expensive. And so, free sounds super good at this point. I love the idea of that. The database that's called that Sarah mentioned is in the chat. If you take a look at it, it's Describe. So that might be something that you want to check out. She has it. I was just looking for it real quick so I could just say it again. Describe. There you
I
go.
just
Sarah put it in.
reattached the link. Yeah.
Purpose. Sometimes the chat gets too long, people can't see.
Yeah,
So
of course.
awesome. Anybody want to respond to that? Has anybody else tried Describe? No, I'm seeing some heads shaking. I don't know if people are using, I did see in the chat some other programs besides Westlaw and Lexis. If anybody wants to speak to a electronic program that they use that they just love, I would love to hear just a few minutes on that if anybody is interested in sharing. Other than Westlaw and Lexis. Okay. Well, it got awfully quiet all of a sudden. Okay. Well, again, this is kind of just we wanted to try to get you thinking, all right, thinking about what all this is about. And I'm gonna turn it over to Kai. Go ahead, Diane, before I do that. Did you have a
Sorry.
hand raised? That's all right.
I'm sorry. I'm on my phone and I'm being ridiculous with Zoom. I do know how to use it. But what I have found is that Westlaw campus is very much the same as the Westlaw full-blown version. And my school is still it's a yearly struggle because we have Westlaw and Lexis, and it's a yearly struggle to get them to approve it. But I went on Westlaw campus and it has almost everything that you need. I think you're just restricted to a couple of different things that they don't have. So if your school has Westlaw or Lexis campus, you might be able to use that instead of the full blown version. And then that's not coming out of your budget.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and somebody's also talking about Westlaw Precision. I think it has a bunch of different things. I always worry about the secondary sources, Diane. Did you think that there was a lot of secondary sources in that campus?
It looked almost exactly the same as what I am using for the full blown Westlaw.
Oh,
I'm just because we switched completely over from we had a local law library access, and then we were taking them down there, and the other school because I'm at two different school. It's a complicated, but I'm at two different places, and that they were subscribing to certain things, and the librarian said no one is using these book resources, and I started to look at Westlaw campus because Westlaw, the full blown one, they were getting a little bit crazy with their markups. And here's another thing. I don't know if you guys do this, but I negotiate with them every single year. I'm like, no, we can't afford that. What can you do for me? We can't afford that much.
right.
Um,
I
because
think sometimes they're receptive to pushback, but I don't know. I mean, I think they just know that where they are in the market. You know what I mean? They just have a good sense that they are pretty secure where they're at. So, but yeah, I think that negotiation is always a good tool, and I will check out that Westlaw campus. Somebody said it's like the Westlaw Classic, so maybe it is. Maybe it does
yeah,
cover awful lot.
I'll take a look at it very quickly right now and come back on and after I've looked at it again. But I found it to be pretty complete.
Okay.
Um,
All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Kai and let her give you some more of the guideline stuff and get into that. And then we might have times for questions and answers at the end. If you have any questions or as we go, just put them in the chat. I'll monitor that too. Thanks. Go ahead, Kai.
Okay, so hi everybody, I'm Kai. If you don't know me, I am a program chair at Athens Technical College in Athens, Georgia, former AAfPE president, and do site visits. I'm on the approval commission and conduct site visits across the country. And so I am here though as your colleague and not as an ABA approval commission member. But we want to talk a little bit about the guidelines and what they say specifically with regard to the library. It's amazing that I'm still doing site visits where people don't realize that they can have a completely online electronic library. That is completely okay as long as you are meeting the other aspects of the guidelines with regard to research and the library. And we'll talk about what those, the most prolific guideline with regard to the library is G303. Okay. And it says that the institution must have available a library adequate for its program of education of paralegals. And that's a little hint I'll give you. Just take your guidelines and go through them and mark where it's highlight where it says must. And then in a different color highlight should. And that will help you to know the things that you have to do and the things that you should be thinking about doing. And that can be very helpful. So you have to have a library adequate for the program of education that you are presenting to your students. Okay. But the ABA doesn't say what that library has to look like. It can be a print, all updated print materials, or it can be electronic, or it can be a combination of both, which is what I use. I just moved to this college 5 years ago, and it was during the pandemic and budget crisis, and was able to, they were maintaining absolutely everything updated in print, and they had Lexis. And so when I came in, I was able to eliminate about $60,000 from the library's budget right off the bat, because there were things that I knew we were getting in Lexis that we didn't have to have in the library. And of course, a lot of that is preference with regard to the things that we just were talking about, Chris, about, do you present students with print materials, or do you do everything electronically? And, I was able to weed out the things that I didn't think that necessarily we would ever look at the book for anything. And then some things that I said, you know what, I really think it makes sense to understand how, certain things are organized in order to understand Lexis and Westlaw. So you have to, as the director or the person who's been tasked with overseeing the paralegal program, you have to evaluate routinely the adequacy of the resources that you have and make sure that you are meeting what's required in the guidelines. Just by saying, oh, well, we're all electronic, you still have to go in and look at your Lexis or your Westlaw or whatever you're relying on subscription and make sure that you're meeting all of the requirements of the guidelines. And also involving your advisory committee, board, whatever you may call it, in that process. Asking them, are there other resources that they think you need to add to your subscription? Okay. we all know if you do have a library that is a physical library that's meeting the needs for your research, they have to allow legal instruction in the library. Certainly they can put some reasonable restrictions on that, but you do have to be able to have that instruction in the library. Chris, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so you can satisfy the guideline by having an external law library, as many of you are outlining that that's what you do. You have either your local law library, local law school library, bar association. All of those are certainly acceptable. There are just a few requirements that you have to meet. If you are using that external library, it has to be accessible to the students, and there has to be a documented understanding between the library and your institution regarding students' accessibility and the ability for you to provide on-site instruction. Okay, so this is the one that you probably have to pay the most attention to. These are the resources that at a minimum you have to provide access to, and up to date access. Okay, so the code, in my state, our code is pretty inexpensive. It's about $600 a year. Not too bad. And then they reprint every 6 years, so it's not too bad. And as you guys were talking about how you talk to your advisory board and find out what's going on in your community, most attorneys, at least in our community, maintain the code in their office because it is not outrageously expensive, and it can be very helpful. And so we do keep that up to date in the library. Plus, it's also available in Lexis when we use Lexis. The reporter for your state, whether that be a state reporter or a regional reporter, and go back at least 25 years. Access to a citator resource, a legal encyclopedia, and it doesn't matter which one. It's what you feel like is the most helpful in your community. Probably the biggest one, but beside the code and the reporter, are all the text and practice manuals and treatises that practitioners use in your community. I try to make sure that I know which form books, what practice manuals people are using in our community, and that's something I ask the advisory board about, because those end up being so very helpful for students. Because those are the things that if a law firm has any books besides the code, it's going to be those specific practice manuals that apply to their practice. There's one particular one for domestic relations in Georgia that we use, and it's the Bible with regard to practicing family law in Georgia. And so you can sign into Lexis and get to it, but having that physical book in your hand is really helpful when you're meeting with clients. So that is something that you want to pay real close attention to, what you are getting update versions of. Text, periodicals, and other resources about the paralegal profession. There are not, unfortunately, a lot of new books about the profession. I have kind of started a list of some books, but not a lot of them have been printed recently. And so that is challenging, whether you have a physical or an electronic library. Having those types of resources, there's fewer periodicals on the profession than there were when I first started teaching. So that is a challenge to try, but you need to make sure that either it's available in your electronic library, because all of our libraries now have ebooks and they're not keeping them on the shelves. And it doesn't matter whether you have them electronically or physically, but you do have to have resources on the profession, and then dictionaries. So those 7 things are the things that you've got to maintain, no matter whether you've got an internal, external, electronic, physical, whatever kind of library you got to have those things.
Hi,
Okay.
just a quick question that's in the chat, and I think you just answered it, but I just want to make sure that it's clear. So those are people that are using those state libraries, or something as an outside source. They just have to make sure that the state library has these 7, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. And or if they don't, like if they don't have those on the profession, then have them in your program, and maybe there's a central location in your program, a particular place where students hang out, or, a place where they can come in your office and check things out. So if that law library does not have things on the profession, then you're going to have to supplement that.
Okay. Gail has a question.
Yes.
Okay, put my mute button. Kind of as a follow-up, can you use like type of kind of like OER resources to try to keep the paralegal profession information current, as opposed to actually having to either have electronic books or textbooks? Because that's what I've been doing. I've just been kind of collecting articles, and when they get over reapproval time age, I get rid of them. But I try to keep at least, the past 7 years. But does that work? I mean, would that apply?
I think that's a great option. I haven't run across that in any of the site visits I've done, but as long as it's accessible to the students, I think you're good there.
And somebody asked in the chat if it was okay, and I think you actually said, Kai, that you had this, but like if you have them accessible in your office,
Right.
like if
Yes.
there's, like there are some other things that are being mentioned, like some of those things that help you keep the paralegal profession up to date, texts and periodicals. If you have them in your office that's accessible by students, you should be good too, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
And as long as you're, routinely saying to the students, hey, we have these resources. You want to come check this out?
okay,
Don't do it and then not let them know that you have it.
gotcha. And then there's a couple of questions just about like anything specifically that might be a recommendation, like for the law dictionary, would it definitely be Blacks, or people using other things? And how about paralegal journals besides NALA's facts and findings? Anything that people are using? And I mean, Kai and anybody that wants to join
Yeah,
in on
anybody
that.
jump in. The problem is just like, in, I'll say secular society, there's fewer and fewer print periodicals that exist. And so, you've got to find other ways to get that information out. And I think Gail's doing a great job if she's gathering that information kind of in a OER fashion. I don't, I mean, there's nothing that says you have to have a particular edition of Blacks, or a particular edition of Orans, or whatever, or that you even have to have one particular dictionary. That's up to you, as long as you have a dictionary, or a dictionary resource for them. And what
And
was
Kai, and I guess I was just going to ask you too. I mean, and when a lot of these visits now are virtual, and when they're doing the visits, like, what are the schools, what do they have to supply in order to kind of make sure that we've got these 7 things? How do you see that? If you can't physically be there, are they taking pictures or videos, or what are they doing?
Really seeing a combination of all of what you said, Chris. You have to, if you've got any resources in your physical library on campus, and or if you're using an external library, you have to provide a video for or pictures. I'm happy to look at them as pictures too, for your site visit if it's a virtual site visit. Okay. And it's fine just, taking your phone and going in and saying, okay, well, here's the code and here's the reporter. It does not have to be a, professionally filmed and edited video. And showing any of those resources that you're using that are not being kept up to date, that they are labeled as such. And let me just speak to that because I know this has come up so many times, but you do not have to label each individual volume as being not up to date. At some point, I think there was an interpretation that said every single volume had to have the sticker with the label. No, as long as if it's a shelf, or if it's in one stack, as long as you've got some signage, it's okay. You don't have to label each one, because I know I use my physical materials a lot in class, and those stickers come on and off, and you know and to make it, we're looking for the that you're attempting to follow the guideline, and we're not asking you to put a sticker on every single book. And I had a hard time with my law librarian when I came here, because at our librarian, at our last site visit, the site team had said, yeah, you got to put a sticker on every single one. And I came in and I said, no, you don't. You don't have to put a sticker on every one. Well, that's what they said. And I said, I'm telling you, you do not have to have a sticker on every book. And they're falling off everywhere in the floor. And so, so that's one thing, is taking pictures of that. If you do have up-to-date resources, then you want to have a librarian as one of the meetings that you set up for your site visit, one of the scheduled meetings. Lots of times, though, if you have a fully electronic library, you set up that meeting and there's really nothing to discuss with the librarian. So you kind of just need to work with your site team chair to figure out if they need to meet with the librarian or not. But you need to have a discussion with even if you have a completely electronic, and I think you can go to the next slide, Chris. I think I might have it on that next slide, or it might be 2 slides later. So that's your section that says you can rely solely on electronic resources or a combination thereof, and labeling the out of date, just signage, not every label. And the next slide, Chris. Okay, it may be even the next one, but that's okay. Making sure that you're talking to your advisory board about what resources you have, what resources the community is currently using in the practice of law, and making sure that you're meeting not only those 7 things that the ABA says you have to have, but you're also meeting what your community leaders are saying are being used in the legal profession. Okay.
in the chat, just Kaya, a second, a lot of people are suggesting, and I think it's a great idea, is to make sure like maybe your students hook up with the state bar associations or the, the ABA directly, just to get maybe some of their resources too and have access to those as well.
Yes. So if you have an affiliation with an ABA approved law school that lets you use their collection, if they maintain a collection, you want to have a letter from the law school librarian that you're going to give to your site team chair when they come or log in. And anything that you have on site with regard to the profession. Okay. And then you have to explain how to use these resources before you turn the student loose on them, kind of common sense. And that's whether it is using the book or using electronic resources. So 303, you can go ahead, Chris. 303 is the main guideline that deals with the library. These others are more peripheral. You can go in and take a look at them. The first one is just saying that you're going to maintain, if you have multiple program options, you're going to maintain library resources appropriate to your legal specialty courses. That's where I think, looking at the practice manuals and the form books is really helpful. G202B5 is about, if one program in your college or one, division of your college has, 3/4 of the library and you're only given a little bit, that's probably not fair. We want to make sure that everybody's comparable to other programs of similar size. So if there are similar programs like you, that you both have access to same amount of library space. 203 E5 is probably the one I was highlighting earlier. Evaluating the advisory committee or board should be evaluating the adequacy of your library resources. That means sitting down with them with your printout from your Lexis or your Westlaw or your library, whatever you're relying on, and going through it and them saying, yeah, you need to maintain that, or you need to add this, you might want to get rid of that.
And I would just say on that too, Kai, is that you can never do that enough because the sources change so frequently. What are they using now? Because sometimes we do it at one meeting and then we don't do it for quite some time and everything's changed. You want to keep talking to them about it.
Right. And another thing is that's one of the questions they'll be asked in their advisory committee meeting is, do you guys talk about the resources, the research resources that are provided? And you don't want them to say, no, we never talk about that, which I have had. You want them to know, oh yes, we have been engaging and helping make sure that the resources that are needed are there.
Note to self, make sure you prep your advisory committee.
G205 has got about 3 sections that deal with the funding. So basically that, if your advisory committee then says, we think you need to add resource 1, 2, and 3, that there's funding out there that you can go and get those resources. Or if there's a particular resource that you need in order to teach teach synchronously online, you've got the funding to go and do that. And then 402 is about those 13 things that a program director needs to do, responsibilities. 11 is evaluating the adequacy of the library / information resources. So, you know, make sure you're taking a look at what you have, not just with yourself, but with your advisory committee and your faculty, and making sure that you're meeting the needs of your students in that particular community.
And Kai, I would also I just add, because I am surprised a lot of times. I think people are a little afraid about the ABA, site visits and things. And one of the things that they can be such a help with is getting that funding. Like if you find that you have like a source out there that you really want, you think is going to be really helpful to your students for legal research, at least when you get that visit, they can actually make recommendations like that. Maybe sure more funding should come to this program so that they can do things with the resources, and get the resources they need. I really think that people don't realize how helpful that can really be.
I think there was a stigma um, going long back with regard to your site team, about, don't bring up anything that might be a problem. Don't discuss it. And that's really not helpful to you or helpful to the process, because be honest and say, hey, because that's the first thing I always ask is, what can we help you with? Now, there's a lot of stuff we can't do, and we can't force administration to do things, but we can lobby on your behalf. We can say, hey, this is what they need to be more successful, to get more students, to generate more product, which sometimes that's the way you have to talk. But don't be scared to bring those things up, because um, I I'm never going to be, oh, that's a check mark against you. That's a mark against you. I'm going to say, okay, let's problem solve. Let's think about how we can address this, how we can get you what you need, how we can lobby for what you need. And so don't don't be scared.
Great. So thank you. So we're going to kind of open it up now. We've got about 10 minutes left. Anything that anybody has a question about or would like to try to, discuss a little further? I know we kind of cut discussion off in the beginning. Just wanted to make sure that we got in all of what Kai, has talked about in the different guidelines and what really is out there. Hopefully you found that. I know that people are already commenting in the chat that this is so helpful. And I do think that, that's our hope for these monthly meetups, is that you get something out of it, you're able to take something away and have some discussion. So anybody have any questions, or any thoughts about things or that are pertinent, I guess, to libraries, I should say. So there is something in the chat about, can you talk a little bit more, Kai, about your subscription to state codes? We're in California with numerous state codes.
Yes. So we just have one state code in Georgia that covers everything. I know, yeah, in California you've got a penal code, you got a family code, you got so I'm sure that, yes, makes it very difficult as far as trying to maintain a print material. What I was saying was that, yeah, in Georgia it's pretty simple and it's very economical right now. To purchase our code. So I'm hoping that, who's that, Yvette? I hope that you have got Lexis or Westlaw, that you have access to all of the different codes.
Thank you so much.
Okay, all right. Yeah, anything else, Chris? I didn't know if there's
Nothing in the chat. I know that Gail was starting to say something. Go ahead, Gail.
Oh, hi, thanks. Yeah, you're most helpful. I'm coming up for reapproval. So, but one thing I was going to ask is, one thing I've done, I mean, I'm a small program. I'm never going to get bigger. I don't think they have this idea that you can have tons of paralegals. I keep telling them it's, not everybody wants to be a paralegal. It's not for everybody. Programs tend to be small, blah, blah, blah. But one thing I found kind of successful on these people going fully electronic is I try to connect really closely, and I'm sure everybody's got a foundation at their college, but I connected really closely with my foundation guy, and I work with him well because I figured Del Mar doesn't really care where the money comes from as long as they get money. So I've been working more with lawyers trying to say, hey, you need to give some money away, here we are. But one thing I did, it doesn't keep my books totally updated, but as they're getting rid of books, they've been donating them to the school. So now instead of having, being 10 years behind on subscription, I'm at least not that too far behind. But I think eventually we're going to go, printless. But that's kind of one area, kind of a nice way to bring in some newer books, especially with the statutes, because Texas is like California. We just have a gazillion volumes. But
And I had that too, Gail. At my previous school, I had an attorney, a local attorney, who was getting rid of all of his. And, he was basically just gonna dump them. And he gave them to us to use. We didn't put them in the library. We put them like in a kind of a student study room. And then he was able to get a tax write-off from the foundation, the college foundation. And so it was a great thing.
Hi, there was a question in the chat just about other suggestions for like legal news sources.
Yeah, I
Because
know.
the Legally Intelligencer, or are there other things out there that maybe you could suggest?
And it's tough. In Georgia, we have it used to be called Fulton County Daily Report. Now it's just the Daily Report, but it was bought out by one of the big publishers, and now it's all much more national focused. It doesn't have that, state feel to it anymore. It publishes our state opinions, but it's not the same. It's hard to find those types of resources, and I'm open to listening, hearing anything anybody uses for that. It's tough.
Anybody else have any suggestions? Thoughts of what they use?
There are, and let me say this, the Daily Report, we have a subscription to that. It can be accessed through our library website, but there's also a section in our Lexus subscription that has some legal periodicals in there. So check your subscription. Know what's in your subscription. I can't say that enough. And that's one thing that you have to submit during your site visit, is a printout of your subscription. And so, or whoever subscription you're relying on. So check it. I bet there's some periodicals that you don't even know about that you have access to.
Yeah, somebody put it in the chat, like even just to look at Westlaw and what you've got, because it may also be in there. There might be, possibilities. So, anybody else with anything? There is a question in there now from Arnold. Kai, can you see
I was
that?
trying to read that. If our library does not have updated print or electronic state or regional reporters, can it meet reapproval guidelines by stating it refers paralegal program students to local public libraries copy? Ooh, I think you're going to run into some problems there, unless you have an established relationship with that law library and you've got a written agreement, and you're having instruction, I won't say instruction there, but your students know about it. It's going to be very difficult to meet the guideline if you don't have something.
Yeah. And I gotta imagine that maybe there's some way you could have some sort of like connection with another law library around that just might be able to allow you to have a way of accessing it or updating it.
I would also say check with your state bar and see what they make available. Many of the state bar now are allowing are giving their members access to fast case and some of the other lesser used products. And you might be able to establish something with them regarding it, but the students have to have access to those 7 things, and they have to be up to date.
And just out of curiosity, Kai, just for I mean, how often how often does the ABA look at like those sources to see if that's the same 7 we should have? Like when was the last, I mean, do you have any knowledge of like, is that every so many years that they look at it
Well,
or?
I mean, that's one of the things that I look at when I'm prepping for a site visit. I go through what you have put into the online portal with regard to your resources, and I look for all 7 of those things. Now, I don't go so far as to say, I don't do research and find out, oh, well, there are these 10 practice manuals that I know they use in Indiana, and then make sure that they have it there on their list. But I do say, to students, did you have access to practice manuals and form books and, that kind of a general question. But yeah, I go through and I check it every time. So yeah, you got to meet it.
All right, well, last call. Any other questions? I know this has been really helpful. I hope you guys are enjoying and got something out of this today. There's a couple of other things in the chat. Just take a chance to just look at that from some people have put in their suggestions of things. And there might be an opportunity there for you. But thanks so much for joining us today. And thank you, Kai, for coming along with me.
Thank
Shannon
you.
has a question. Go ahead, Shannon.
Just real quick, I was just wondering if access to electronic databases is sufficient for the students that are in legal research and writing, or do all students for the program have to have access to that database the entire time they're in the program?
I think that's a real gray area, Shannon.
Okay,
I don't think the guidelines specifically say that right now.
okay,
I provide it in all classes, but I do know there are some programs that are only providing it in the research and writing classes. So
right.
yeah, I think that's a gray area.
Okay, thank you.
And I know that like my school does provide it in the legal research and writing, but then they get it through the rest of the program. So they don't have it like an intro, but they might have it in something else. So I'm sure other programs are doing some of that too.
Question, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
So
Neelafar.
I'm just curious, programs that are giving only in legal research and writing. I mean, legal research and writing is so critical in what we teach our paralegals that in my program, they continue to do those legal research and writing in every class that they are taking afterwards. How are they then practicing what they have learned in legal research and writing if they don't have access for the rest of the program? I mean, if I was a site visit person, I would ask that question. So I'm just curious that how is ABA dealing with that if they're not requiring that we give our students access throughout the program?
Well, there's lots of free resources that are out there. And so I think you can meet the minimum by using those free resources. Um, you know,
Okay.
who's to say that it has to be Lexis or Westlaw? I know that's the direction that we're heading, that we're headed to electronic resources. But what if you did have a fully physical library? You're not providing Lexis or Westlaw in any class.
Right. And somebody said in the chat too about open resources. I mean, there's just all kinds of ways if you don't have the funding to do what you got to do, right? Paige had her hand up. I don't know if she's still on.
Well, I was just going to say we do that. We limit when they have access to Lexis, and we have a remarkable Lexis subscription. It's very robust. And any other class that a professor says, I need it, they get it. But there are some that don't need it. And all of our students, and I would guess many colleges have access to Nexus Uni. Our librarian has put together a resource page of, somebody mentioned the local publications for statutes and reporters, things like that, that are available online, Cornell, things like that. So we do limit it to, because learning how to use Westlaw or Lexis is a learning outcome, right? You have to know how to do that, but can you find the sources elsewhere in other courses? Yeah, Nexus Uni is pretty robust. And I think a
And
lot of colleges and universities have that.
and there are a lot of but surprisingly, there's a lot of law firms that don't have Westlaw or Lexis. And so if our students don't have an idea of how to get stuff from someplace else,
Right.
they're really going to be lost when they get into a law firm that just doesn't have the money to have those kind of programs.
We're teaching them how to be paid stalkers. What we're doing. And so I actually had a friend that said that last night. She's a program director, and she said, I am a stalker. That's what I am.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are at the 12:01 mark, so I do appreciate all of you. And thank you so much for joining us today. And have a great rest of your day.